4 nights ago on the taping, we were still talking about growth and expansion being universal and problems local. And at that time, we sort of interrupted for the last 3 tapings, and I had been addressing some comments to the esteemed television audience, while pointing out each and every night that normally we're giving no direct attention to or making no external direct reference to those watching on television. But without any doubt, us taping this now has had an effect on it, even though we do not continually address sentiments to the audience, nor offer to send you out premiums or solicit nude photographs of yourself and your family, which I know would be extremely enjoyable. Well, no offense, I didn't offer to send you one of me, so we're even. Offer no offense, solicit no offense. Which book of the Bible is that from? All of this was by way of leading up for a second that I think we'll spend at least one more night, sort of, before we pick back up directly about growth in life being universal, comparably speaking, which is all you can speak, and then what seems to be all of humanity's problems, which are secondary problems in the sense we've been talking about it, because you only have one primary problem, if you want to look at it that way, and that's dying. Everything else is, well, neo-Freudian terms, everything that's out of dying is known as a chicken shit problem. Although it is, it is, in this day and time of very free political and democratic reforms on this planet, it is, however, your inalienable right to think otherwise. I mean, that is, you can have a paper cut or a bad back, and you can take it very seriously because it is a fairly cheap hobby, being sick. I mean, everyone's going to be sick, or be ill, infirm in some way. But to actually be sick, you have got to, or I've got to admit, it is a first-class hobby from the sake of efficiency and cost. Because, I mean, you got it all the time. You don't have to go down to the post office and ask them, what's new in stamps, or you don't have to go out to some coin show or one of these gun and knife shows. You just get in the morning, you think, God damn, my back hurts, and there you are. But taking the basis where we were for a second. Quite literally, from a certain kind of unnatural view, unwarranted view, revolutionist view, to use my cheap terminology for a few more times, there is but one primary problem, and that's dying, if you want to look at it that way. And of course, being sick, nobody can laugh about it. If you're sick, you're not standing around making jokes about being sick if you're actually hurt. But what it gets down to is, when you're sick, you're either going to, based upon the grand, efficient structure of the binary world, when you're sick, it's real simple. You're either going to get well or die. So, like I said, it saves a whole lot of wear and tear driving around and checking things out and worrying where things are going. So, in a sense, in a quite real sense, from a revolutionist or a more complex view, when you're at the primary level, you have the same problems, if you want to look at it that way, as a dog does, as a lion, as an eagle. It's just live or die, eat or be at. It is only in, if we call that just being alive, it is only in the secondary world, and as far as this kind of reality displays to the human mind, the ordinary level, man is a singular creature, and it is only man who has, let's just call them problems for a minute. It's only man who has problems, but the problems are local. That is, the problems are unique to him. But that is the ones nowadays, almost taking into account everyone on this planet to varying degrees. But now it is at least for those of you listening to the tape, your primary difficulties in life are now secondary problems because you are not faced with starving to death. And if you are, what the hell are you doing with a television set? See, that kind of thing. So, Your difficulties are not primary. Now, you may be sick, but you got one more time. You got to realize this: you may be sick, and if you are, I know that everybody knows what pain is. But you're either going to get through it or die. So cheer up. But it is a different thing to get from the world of ill, physical maladies into the real world of human problems. In the world of human problems, they're local. They're singular to man. And there is no cure. It is not a matter that you're going to get over it or not get over it, because the secondary, the local problems, as opposed to pointing out that growth is universal and all problems are local. Everything that man calls problems are unique to man, and they start with man. That is, they start with the secondary world, and therefore they are on an endless loop. They're running on an infinite horizon, and they cannot be cured. If they could be cured, it would be death. It would be suicidal. And so secondary problems are cured. If they're cured, it's like a train. If you say, or a bus that went out of sight, and you say, well, thank God that bus drove me nuts. Unless you're about to die, there's going to be another bus come along. There's going to be about the same kind of crowd, about the same kind of problems. So what men ordinarily call problems, from a revolutionist view, are egregiously misnamed. But I wanted to point out that there is, while we're still taking into some account addressing people watching this on tape, there has always been an idea of a kind of universality. It's been floating around as far back as you have recorded history, of men, philosophers, historians, just men in general, responding to the idea that he should be more of a universal creature. Now, as always, this stays rather landlocked. It stays fairly heavy in that it comes out exemplified by notions of a very concrete idea, such as a world with no national boundaries politically, not intellectually. The idea that man should be universal comes out at that level as men saying, well, we would be better off. Some men, parts of last body have men saying, we would be better off, no offense to any particular religion they might say, but we would be better off if we're going to have religion, is for men to be wise enough to understand that there is a common denominator. There is a worldwide basis for all religion. That man should be, in that sense, a universal creature. He should not be fighting over nationalistic boundaries. He should certainly not be fighting over religious ideas. All right, so this is nothing new. And in fact, it is so much at the heart of the universal expansion of man, as I assume all of you are well read enough to know, that there continues to be like a reactionary force, that kind of conservative force, that kind of D force, as we have once mapped it, in that kind of triad of the three energies running things at a secondary three-dimensional level. There is a strong reaction in people, normally referred to in the political sense as conservative, I didn't mean to get it too complicated, that react in a quite negative, quite hostile reaction to the idea of some universal political, even theory, much less struggle against arrangement. That is, right-wing people, as they're normally called, make it simple. If they hear the idea that, as all of you know, all you got to do is drive through conservative areas of the world from Mississippi to Albania, and there'll be signs up, get us out of the UN. That sort of thing. That, wait a minute, we can't have a universal government, and you even have fundamental Christians and Jews and Muslims saying, wait a minute, and every holy book, they can pull out something and say, wait a minute, that's when the end is near. That's when the evil forces are taking over. When? And then you've got to fill in the blank. That is, when our beloved nation of Ireland falls into the hands of those liberal, wide-eyed people running the idea of a one-world government. There is, well, you can always tell when something is alive, when life is using it, is always, as you people should surely know by now, there will be a strong reaction to it. And it's not that is right or wrong per se. It is a reflection that the growth of life is universal. Or the kind of picture that I've tried to pull out that's about as good as you can do for the time being is if you looked upon man's world, not just the cosmos, but it's sort of an idea that they have adopted for the Big Bang, but if you looked at man himself, the nervous system of man, the secondary world of man, does not run in a linear fashion. The ordinary mind says it does. That's the only thing it can do with it. That's the only way that the mind can work. That's the only way that man can talk or discuss it is in a linear fashion. But it is more like you're standing there individually in the center of this balloon and it's going in all possible directions. That is the universal nature of the expansion of life, which absolutely confounds any ordinary view. You cannot do anything with it, except you can play with it in theory for a few minutes, but no one is particularly interested in it. Other than the fact, when it gets down to the ideas that would seem to take on some specific, pragmatic manifestation, such as there's always somebody standing around saying, wait a minute, what we should do is all world governments give up their power. And they can say it politically, they can do it religiously, they could do it economically, but normally nowadays it would be politically, and they say, well, what we should do is do away with all local governments and turn it over to the hands of either the United Nations or some new world government. And people go, oh, no. I mean, become fanatic about it. But can you hear the reality of that in your own nervous system? In the nervous system of man? An ordinary man could not do without what appears to be the institutions out here. The nervous system of man cannot be original. It is a matter of plagiarism. It is a matter of heredity being redefined as because. It is the continual, healthy movement of one generation to another. You could not, unless you're a revolution, I'm talking to ordinary people now. If you told an ordinary person, give up all of your local governments up here, and let's turn it over to somebody else. To begin with, I don't know who somebody else is, and they can't do it. Well, what you would be asking the individual nervous system, if they said, well, wait a minute, you're certainly being metaphorical, if not symbolic. I don't have any different governments in here. Aha! Oh yeah. And it's not just symbolic. It's your notion of your nation, of your religion, of your culture, of your race. That is your world governments. What can anybody at the ordinary level think about? They can only think from certain views. That's all they got. Even again, if you can get ordinary people to say, which you can, but some ordinary people just say it on their own, but it goes nowhere, will say, well, wait a minute, I'd be better off if I could shake away all of the past forced alignments with religions and politics. The man says, well, I grew up in Armenia. I grew up being a Middle Eastern, an Orthodox Christian. I grew up with a certain attitude toward Turks. I grew up with a certain attitude toward Greeks. I grew up, my father was such a way that I grew up with a kind of anti-feminist attitude. You can go on and on and on, and a man can even say, well, I'm struggling against it. I'd be better off without them. We're not discussing whether it'd be better off without them. Notice this, you can't be without them if you're ordinary. If you took away what an ordinary man says, and it sounds as though he is making some claim to being more intelligent by admitting his lack of it. For a man saying, well, what I am doing is I am struggling personally to get away from all of the enforced, imposed things I just picked up subconsciously, but all of my prejudice, all of my one-sided opinions, racially, sexually, nationalistically. And that sounds, to any sort of just ordinary, enlightened view, that sounds admirable. That a man's saying, I want to give up all of my automatic intellectual reactions adversely to other people. I want to be able to, quote, think for myself, which is being universal. But if you took away this man's, the continuing struggle for him to do this, if in some way you could come down and play a kind of intellectual King Midas and you gave him the power, all right, we'll take away all of your prejudice. Is that what you want? The man says yes. I've been studying philosophy. I go to different churches continually. I've traveled the world. I've tried to broaden my perspective. That's what I want. I've even taken drugs. I've tried to do all sorts of weird metaphysical experiments. I want to just increase my whole intellectual horizon to the point that I have no particular point of view. If you could go, all right, is that what you want? And you went, wham, the man would be what? Well, trust me, you wouldn't want to take a long bus trip sitting next to him. Well, he'd be wiped out. If you took away what he calls his prejudice, if you took away what he calls his one-sided opinions, all of his ideas, all of his notions that are less than fully insightful, fully enlightened, and it's not that he's stupid. It's not that he is being dumb. What he is attempting to describe is right on line. He's right there in the forefront of where life moves in an evolutionary manner, not a revolutionary. But he is right there moving along, saying, what he's saying is, I wish I could be more universal. What I've been calling the revolution is the continuing source. It is like the reservoir of that kind of universal opinion. Always has been, relatively speaking, which is what makes it so difficult to pinpoint or to pin down. Is me having Kyroot write these letters to himself, to the show, besides the ones we really get, which still sometimes I wonder, maybe I should bring them as which are the blankest, which are the weirdest, which are the most interesting, the ones that Kyroots and I make up, or the ones we actually get. I don't know. Kyroots said he didn't want to think about it, and so that's good enough for me. But at any rate, back to the point, and this is not taking shots at people who watch the show and write in. It is a continuing process, and it's not just viewers, as happens if we were doing this out publicly and people wandered in, is people will come around something like this, and I don't mean just me and us, but throughout history. And they will kind of, stick their head into it, and they'll listen, and they'll admit, with no great hostility, if you ask them or someone, they just volunteer, they'll say, I enjoy watching this show, or I enjoy hearing you, or they've done it to people in the past, and they'll say, to tell you the truth, I got no idea what it is, but I like it. And if you think about that for a second and you were serious, you'd think, Jesus, that is weird. You mean you like something, you've got no idea what it is? There is almost no way to pinpoint when you're dealing with that which goes against the very limitations of the human mind. Because the whole idea, if I got this too estranged and out of kilter from where I started tonight, in the same way that I've tried to describe that the human condition is not one of sorrow, and is not one of sin, it's not one of shortcomings, it's one of an open-ended growth, which is what makes man seem to have secondary problems. So it's what makes man seem to have psychological ills, is the fact that this nervous system, physically you might as well face the fact, you're a complete product. You can play around and put on a few muscles, you can lose a little weight, gain a little weight, but you and everyone else is basically what humans are. You're just not going to change it. Not the primary level. And you're not going to change what you eat. You can go from eating 20% bran flakes to 40% bran flakes. But you cannot take up yoga and get to the point where you can live off eating used tires. At the physical level, man is what he is. And then, now I know people play with that, but that's just a hobby. And you're not up to any sort of actual, potentially profitable work to play around with your body, so to speak. To try and say, well, I'm going to learn to do without food. I'm going to gradually get to the point that I won't have to eat. I can breathe exhaust fumes from a bus and live. It's a hobby, but it's not going to change what your nervous system is. If you look at it on the basis that man is physically complete, at least he is in your generation, you're just not going to make any change. It's an easy hobby. It's sort of an easy way out is for people who would think that they're interested in the kind of things the revolution is about, to say, well, I'm going to do something. I'm going to be a hands-on kind of guy. I'm going to go join a monastery. I'm going to join for this group of people that all they do is eat unleavened bread. Or all they do is they stay on their head 20 hours a day. They sleep on their head. In other words, do something physical. No, it's not. It is. That's the whole point, in one way, of all rituals, religious and otherwise, is apparently you're doing something. Even if the payoff doesn't seem to come, that if you joined up with some cult or some religious faction that says, well, this whole thing about the revolution and being able to understand more of a universal, or have more of a universal sight, that's exactly what we're up to, except we don't just talk about it, we're working on it, because there's a certain kind of, we sit in a certain position in a certain way, and we do that for 10 hours a day, and we only eat a certain food, and we hold our hands like this, and it's not just funny. I mean, you can laugh at it and make it sound silly, but if you do that, understand this, it's not going to do what it says, but at least you're doing something. And it seems better than if you had two people and you were talking to them about the idea of having a more universal attitude and what I've been calling the revolution. You talked to them a few minutes and you had two people went, yes, that's exactly. Now, I got nothing wrong, I got nothing personally against life, but that's what I'm after. I would really like that. And so if you told one of them, well, if you told one of them not much more than what we seem to do on these TV tapings, and the guy listened, and another guy, you said, all right, there's another way to go about this. And you told him something about sitting in a certain position 10 hours a day and eat a certain food and sit and hold your hands. And even if you knew beforehand that that's not going to do anything, notice, at least at the ordinary view, it seems like you're trying to do something. And it's not to be laughed, well, to a revolution it's not to be laughed at, but it's just to be avoided. It doesn't go anywhere. Except at the ordinary level, that's part of the whole contribution at the wider level of religion, for instance, in all of its forms. And religion all the way into politics, marching in formations, standing in a crowd, going to a political rally, going to a meeting of economists, and everybody stand up and they cheer the guy that got the Nobel Prize. All of that is a form of ritual. All of that is an attempt to expand your own nervous system. And you can be outside it and say, well, what in the hell would a bunch of people who are economists get together and think that they're going to understand something? And because from one view you could say, well, they got to be world-class idiots to have gone to school and majored in economics when it's a laughing stock. Well, next to weather forecasting, I guess maybe it looks good. But you can say, well, what a bunch of idiots. You can do it about psychiatry, you can do it about anything. But notice this. At the ordinary level, at least they appeared to have done something. Because they could say, let us say we had an economist or a physicist or a psychiatrist or a priest, and he heard something about the revolution. Any example. And they had some notion of what we're talking about, which everybody has sort of a notion. And then you had a man who hadn't done anything except read weird books and take drugs and mushrooms and join up all kinds of cults. And you had them both. And the guy that tried to be a revolutionist, which actually just turned out to be kind of a street-level smartass. The guy on drugs and such as that. And he could say, well, hey, you wasted your life. You spent what? Becoming a psychiatrist. And the guy said, well, about 12 years in school. And you really thought what you want to do was understand people, right? And the psychiatrist said, well, yeah, I did. Well, do you realize you're a laughing stock? It didn't do crap. Now, let's say that the psychiatrist, in a moment of clarity, went, well, I'm not going to stay here and say you're wrong. But the psychiatrist's feeling is, and he could look at this guy, and he just takes a look at him. He understands what he is. But he might ask him, what have you done? Well, I left school. I realized that school didn't mean anything. It didn't have what I wanted, so I left school in the 10th grade, and I hit the road. I've been to Tibet, and I've been to Nepal, I've been to Rio while alive. And he could list all the drugs he's taken, and all the experiences, and times I believed that God was talking to me. And then even better than that, one time I thought that Buddha was talking to me. And he can do all this, and so the psychiatrist looks at him. And, of course, I'm doing all this shortcut, and life does not work this way. And I don't mean the psychiatrist is really any better off, but he looks at him, and his feeling is, well, at least I tried to do something, and you didn't do anything. That is the hobby of pursuing life. That is the hobby of pursuing what everyone else thinks. That's the hobby of being sane, of being a plagiarist, of being a violinist and not really wanting to sing. But if you're a violinist and you don't want to sing, you're not much of a violinist. Do you understand? If you're a psychiatrist and you don't want to be a ditch digger, you're not much of a psychiatrist. Okay. If you're a ditch digger and you don't want to be a psychiatrist, you're not really much of a ditch digger. The trouble of the people have of pinpointing what this is about is it is the source. Not me, not us standing here, but this part of life is always the source behind the push, or at the heart of where the life is pushing, to make man, secondarily speaking, more of a universal creature. And on that basis, you cannot, from a local view, you can't hardly get your hands on it. You can hear something about it and say, well, it's kind of interesting, but then you're about left with that other version that Kyroots pointed out of what happens when you get, the way he put it to you first for 2 nights in a row, is that if you try to get people to look at more than 2 things at once, or at more than 2 directions at once, they're inclined to either go blind, get annoyed, or laugh. That's all they can do, because you can't do anything with it. And so the attempt to be more universal, not politically, not scientifically, not religiously, but to get away from, assuming it's possible, thinking that has to run either in that direction or this direction, of having to live next to the railroad track. And the more intelligent you are on this planet, the more you live by the railroad track. Things either go this way or they go that way. Things are either true or not true. Things are either proven or not proven, or things either have some potential, based upon current thinking, to be valid, or they're completely without any merit whatsoever that's already been established. There was, however, tonight, Kyroots pointed out one man in the heart, in the raisin bran of his rebellious years, or as Willie of Avon would say, back in his salad days of his rebellious years. Well, I'm mixing up 2 Kyroots, aren't I? At any rate, one guy in the excitement of it all, like you pointed out, he said that he had reached the point where he was as much fun coming as he was going. You understand? That would be to be universal. At the ordinary level, how are people pleased? How are people secondarily, intellectually, how are they pleased? There's only one serious, sane way to say the man's pleased. It's when he's correct. And it gets into, of course, what other people would say is more than intellectually. They could say socially, artistically. But it's all the same as I am correct. That's the only way you can be pleased. How else you going to get awards? Unless you go to the goddamn award and honor store, But how else are you going to get a Nobel Prize? You got to be right. They don't give prizes for people who are wrong. What happened to those guys at Georgia Tech that come up with cold fusion in a urine specimen bottle or whatever? You can only be pleased either coming or going. But to be more universal, the guy said, I'm as much fun coming as I am going. But to be serious, the only way you can be pleased is you got to be going the right way. Well, all right, yes, I'm on the right track now. Or you make some comment, you paint a picture, you write some music, and somebody else there says, hey, very good. And you think, well, now I'm on the right track. That's all right. It's a decent world hobby, but it's local. A revolutionist would be as much fun to himself coming as he was going. Ciao.